If you told me 3 years ago that my marriage would explode over a $37 charge at a sushi restaurant I never visited, I'd have laughed. Or maybe I wouldn't have laughed. Maybe I'd have felt that prickling dread I get when things are about to go off the rails. But in the end, that's what it was. A bank alert, a string of unfamiliar restaurant receipts, and the unraveling of a life I thought I understood. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the ground beneath you shifts so suddenly you can't even find your feet. Wednesday, 10:47 a.m. The text from my bank was so innocuous I nearly ignored it. Unusual activity detected. $37.90, Sushi Hana, 10:33 a.m. Please verify. A frown. It had to be Julia, my wife. She handled most of our expenses, and I trusted her, implicitly, with everything. But something in the back of my mind twitched. We'd never gone to Sushi Hana. Julia didn't even like raw fish, or so I thought. I thumbed open our banking app. That's when I noticed a pattern. 2, sometimes 3 restaurant charges a week, all during office hours. A steakhouse, a Thai spot, that sushi place again. Always for 2, always during the day. My pulse quickened. I dialed Julia, almost on autopilot. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright and airy. "Hey, babe. Hey, did you go out for sushi this morning?" A pause, just long enough for my stomach to drop. "Oh, yeah, with the girls from work. You know how it is, team lunch." I almost believed her. I wanted to believe her. I wish that had been enough. But it wasn't, because 3 days later, another alert pinged. This time, a French bistro. Wine for 2, lunch again. Julia's office was a modest accounting firm, 9 women, 1 boss. And that boss, I realized with a cold certainty, was the only man she ever mentioned from work, David. I had met David twice, once at Julia's office Christmas party. He'd shaken my hand, smiled a little too warmly, and spent the rest of the night making Julia laugh at jokes I didn't understand. The second time, I nearly forgot. He'd bumped into us at the movies, alone, and offered to buy us popcorn. Julia had blushed. I should have seen it then. I didn't. The next week, Julia came home later than usual. Her hair was mussed, her makeup reapplied in a hurry. She smelled faintly of cologne, something woodsy and unfamiliar. "Car trouble," she said, breathless. "David gave me a ride." I nodded, trying to ignore the buzzing in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, counting ceiling tiles, replaying every moment of the past few months. The late nights, the quick showers, the way she'd started turning her phone face down on the kitchen counter. I started noticing more. The way she flinched when I touched her shoulder. How she'd stopped planning our weekends. Her laughter, suddenly rare, felt forced when it came. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to be wrong. But the next morning, I checked her phone. I know, privacy, trust, all that, but I had to know. She'd changed her passcode. That, more than anything, was the answer. Still, I tried to be rational. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe work was hard. But the evidence mounted, and the pit in my stomach deepened. Then came the night everything changed. Julia sat across from me at the dinner table, picking at her salad. She looked tired, drawn. I almost felt sorry for her. "I'm pregnant," she said, voice barely above a whisper. It took me a moment to process. My mind reeled. We talked about kids, someday, not yet. But now? "Are you sure?" I asked, my throat tight. She nodded, eyes shining. But there was fear there, not joy. I tried to smile. Wow, big news." She didn't smile back. Suddenly, it all made sense. The secrecy, the excuses, the late nights. My mind leapt to the worst possible conclusion, but I pushed it down hard. Days passed. Julia became even more withdrawn. I tried to be supportive, tried to act excited, but the suspicion gnawed at me. Then, 2 weeks later, the truth detonated. I came home early, hoping to surprise her with dinner. Instead, I found her on the phone, her voice sharp, urgent. "I can't keep lying to him," she was saying. "He's not stupid, David. He's—" She saw me and froze. The rest happened in a blur. Tears, yelling, denials, then confessions. She'd been seeing her boss for months. It started as late nights at the office, then drinks, then, inevitably, more. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. He understands me and Is it his?" I asked, voice hollow. Her silence was answer enough. My world collapsed. I moved into the guest room that night. Julia cried herself to sleep in our bed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was drowning. The next day, I confronted David. I went to his office, ignored the receptionist's protests, and stormed in. He looked up, startled, then resigned. "We never meant to hurt you," he said. "Julia, she's special. I hit him. I wish I could say I felt better, but I didn't. I walked out, my hand throbbing, my heart in shreds. Julia begged me to stay, said she needed me, said she didn't want to do this alone. "Please," she whispered, "you're the only one I trust." I almost laughed. Trust? That was gone, vaporized. But then she said something that froze me in place. "I don't even know if it's his," she whispered. "It could be yours." The uncertainty was cruel. I was trapped, dangling. Weeks passed. The baby grew. So did my resentment. People talk about forgiveness like it's a switch you can flip. It's not. It's a long, messy slog through memories, regrets, and what-ifs. Julia insisted on a paternity test. She said it was for closure. I knew it was for her own peace of mind. The day the results came, Julia sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand. She was shaking. "It's his," the letter read. Just 2 words. That was all. Julia broke down. I felt nothing, numb. She asked me to stay, said she needed stability for the baby's sake. I moved out the next day. The months that followed were a haze. I got my own place, started therapy, tried to rebuild. Julia called often. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she raged. I listened, mostly in silence. She gave birth in spring. I didn't go to the hospital. She sent me a photo, a tiny baby girl, dark hair, David's eyes. That should have been the end, but life, I learned, is messier than that. Julia's world crumbled. David refused to leave his own family. Julia was alone, overwhelmed, desperate. One night, she showed up at my door, baby in arms, eyes red from crying. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I ruined everything." I let her in. I made tea. I listened. That night, the baby screamed for hours. Julia clung to me, begging for help. I held the baby, rocked her, tried to ignore how much she looked like him. Julia slept on my couch. In the morning, she asked if she could stay. I said no. "I can't be what you need," I told her, voice flat. "Not anymore." She left, tears streaming down her face. Weeks passed. I heard from mutual friends that Julia was struggling. Postpartum depression, loneliness, regret. I started running into her around town. She looked tired, thinner, but always tried to smile. One day she called. "I need help," she said. "Not from you, from someone. I can't do this alone." She checked herself into therapy. I admired her for that. As the months passed, I started healing. I met new people, made new friends. I learned to cook for one. The anger faded, replaced by something like acceptance. Julia and I spoke rarely. When we did, it was civil, sometimes even friendly. One day, she called with news. She was moving out of state for a fresh start. "I'm sorry for everything," she said. "I hope you find happiness." I wished her luck. I never saw her again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that first bank alert, how one tiny charge unraveled a life, how quickly trust can vanish, how slowly it returns. I'm not sure I'll ever trust like that again, but I'm learning to trust myself. And that, for now, is enough. My life, after Julia left for good, felt like a series of blank pages. Some nights, I would sit in the living room, the silence so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I'd watch the dust motes swirl in the sunlight and think about all the ways things could have gone differently. I'd think about the little girl, her little girl, living somewhere miles away, never knowing who I was or how close I'd come to being her father. That first month after Julia's departure, I buried myself in routine. Work, gym, groceries, repeat. I stopped checking my phone for her texts. I stopped waiting for the next apology, the next plea for help or forgiveness. There was something terrifying in the quiet, but also, after a while, something liberating. I was free in a way I hadn't been since before I met Julia. Free, but also unmoored. One Friday, I got a call from my bank, the same fraud team that had flagged those restaurant charges months ago. This time, the alert was for a subscription to a dating app. My name was on the charge, but I hadn't signed up for anything. I remembered, with a sick twist in my gut, that Julia used my card for subscriptions sometimes. I wondered if she was already trying to move on, find someone new, or maybe she'd just forgotten to update her payment info. Either way, the reminder stung. I canceled the card. I started going out on weekends, just for the sake of not being alone. I'd sit at a bar and watch couples flirt, laugh, touch each other's arms the way Julia used to touch mine. I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust someone again. Every time a woman smiled at me, I'd feel a flash of hope, followed by a wave of suspicion. What secrets did she carry? What wounds? What lies? I'd second-guess every word, every glance. The emotional fallout from Julia's betrayal had left me cautious, analytical, and a little cynical. I saw dishonesty everywhere, even when it wasn't there. One night, a woman named Mara sat down beside me. She was funny, sharp, and she had a way of looking you straight in the eyes, like she was daring you to lie to her. We talked for hours about books, movies, bad dates, and heartbreaks. She told me she'd been cheated on too. Her ex had left her for a coworker, just like Julia had left me for her boss. We laughed about how small the world was and how big the pain could feel. There was a micro hook in each moment of our conversation. Mara's sudden laughter, her stories about wild road trips, her confession that she'd once thrown a pie at her ex's car. But the biggest hook came when she asked, "Do you think you'll ever be able to trust again?" I hesitated. I didn't know the answer. I wanted to say yes, but the words felt heavy, stuck in my throat. "I'm trying," I said finally. She nodded, and somehow that small gesture made me feel less alone. We started seeing each other, slowly, cautiously. Mara never pressed for more than I could give. She didn't ask for promises, just honesty. For months, we built something tentative and fragile, a friendship, maybe more. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't done since before Julia's affair. Mara was a mirror, reflecting back my wounds, but never judging them. Still, the scars ran deep. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd heard Julia's voice. I'd check my phone, half expecting a message from her, some late-night confession or plea. Nothing ever came. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, fighting the old, familiar feelings of inadequacy. Was I unworthy of love? Was I always going to be the guy left behind? I went to therapy. The therapist asked me to write an impact letter, like the ones people write after infidelity. I poured out every feeling, anger, sadness, betrayal. I wrote about the bank alerts, the restaurant charges, the moment I realized my marriage was over. I wrote about the baby, about seeing Julia's boss in the hospital waiting room, about holding a child who would never be mine. The process was brutal, but cathartic. I started to see patterns in my pain. The need for control, the fear of being vulnerable, the urge to run away before anyone else could. Therapy helped. Mara helped. Time helped. but nothing could ever erase the memory of that night. The night the world tilted and never quite righted itself. One afternoon, months after Julia left town, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name on the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Julia holding her daughter in a sunlit park. The baby was laughing, reaching for a butterfly. Julia looked older, sadder, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. On the back, she'd written in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for everything. I hope you find peace." I stared at the photo for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just felt a kind of closure, like the last page of a painful book. I put the photo in a drawer and didn't look at it again. A year passed. My life began to fill with new people, new routines. Mara and I grew closer, but never rushed. I told her everything, eventually, the full truth about Julia, about the affair, about the baby. She listened, never flinched. She told me her own stories, her own wounds. We learned together that trust is not a gift, it's a process. Sometimes it's a leap of faith. I started volunteering at a shelter, helping people who'd lost homes, jobs, relationships. I met people whose pain was raw, whose losses were fresh. I realized that heartbreak is universal, but so is resilience. The more I helped others, the less I felt like a victim. Sometimes Julia would cross my mind, not as the villain in my story, but as a complicated person who had made a terrible mistake. I stopped blaming her for everything. I stopped blaming myself. I started to believe, little by little, that I was worthy of love, of happiness, of a new beginning. Then, one September morning, Mara asked if I wanted to move in with her. The question hung in the air like a challenge, a dare to trust again. "Only if you're ready," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about all the things I'd lost and all the things I'd found. I thought about the bank alerts, the restaurant charges, the lies and the confessions. I thought about Julia, her boss, the baby. But most of all, I thought about the future. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady for the first time in years. "I'm ready." We found a small apartment on the edge of town with creaky floors and a view of the river. We filled it with books, plants, laughter. I kept my old routines, work, gym, volunteering. But now there was someone to come home to, someone who made the silence feel warm, not oppressive. One evening, Mara cooked dinner and we sat on the balcony, watching the sunset over the water. She reached for my hand and I let her. I felt the old fear, the old doubt, but I didn't let it win. "I never thought I'd get here," I admitted. "Not after everything." She smiled. "You did, though. You're here." And I was. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Julia. I wonder if she found happiness, if her daughter grew up strong and loved. I wonder if Julia ever forgave herself. I hope she did. As for me, I learned that trust is a choice, that healing is messy, non-linear, but possible, that love is not guaranteed, but it's worth fighting for. I still get bank alerts sometimes, fraud checks, random charges. They don't scare me anymore. They're just reminders that life goes on, that the past is just that, past. In the end, my story isn't about betrayal or revenge or even forgiveness. It's about survival. It's about learning who I am when everything falls apart and who I can be when I finally let go. If you made it all the way here, I hope my story helped. Please like, comment, or subscribe if you want to hear more. And remember, the truth always finds its way, one way or another. I didn't see Julia again, not in person, but her shadow lingered, sometimes in memory, sometimes in the sudden jolt of a bank alert on my phone, which now only signaled ordinary life, groceries, gas, the dull machinery of moving on. Healing after betrayal isn't a straight line. It's a looping, jagged path full of triggers and unexpected obstacles. I'd read somewhere that if you're trying to recover, the best thing you can do is to ask yourself how. How do I trust again? How do I stop rehearsing my pain? How do I move on? Instead of the endless, why did this happen to me? The advice sounded simple, almost naive, but on the worst days, it was all I could cling to. So I made it a habit. When memories of Julia would surface, her hand in mine at the movies, her laughter in the kitchen, the way she looked at our wedding, I'd let the pain pass through me, then try to ask a better question. How do I make today good, even if it's small? How do I stop letting her choices define my life? I started journaling, just a few lines in the morning, more at night when the apartment felt especially empty. Sometimes I wrote angry things I'd never say aloud. Sometimes I wrote letters to Julia that I'd never send. Sometimes I wrote to the man she'd chosen. Sometimes to the baby who would never know me. It didn't fix anything, but it gave the pain somewhere to go. I realized pretty quickly that rehearsing the pain, telling everyone I met about the betrayal, hoping for sympathy, didn't help. It started to feel like the story was becoming my identity, and I didn't want that to be true. I wanted to be more than the man whose wife cheated on him and left him with a shattered life. So I tried to shift focus. I volunteered more at the animal shelter, started running again, and went on long, aimless drives with the music loud enough to drown out my thoughts. I forced myself to accept invitations to dinner, to trivia nights, to the kind of awkward social events I'd always avoided. Sometimes I left early, the weight of isolation too heavy. But sometimes I stayed, and sometimes I even laughed. It was maybe 6 months later that I found myself at a friend's birthday party, standing awkwardly in the kitchen with a drink, when Mara started talking to me. She was new in town, a transplant from up north, and she had an easy, open way about her. She asked where I was from, what I did, and, when the conversation lulled, what had brought me to the city. There was a time when I would have told her the whole story, almost compulsively, as if to warn her off. That night, I just shrugged and said, needed a fresh start. She nodded, like she understood. We talked for hours. She told me about her last relationship, how it ended in a slow, mutual drifting apart. She talked about the loneliness of new places, of old losses. We swapped stories about our worst jobs, our strangest neighbors, our favorite books. It was the most natural conversation I'd had in years. We started seeing each other, slowly. At first, it was just coffee, then dinner, then walks along the river. I was careful, almost fearful, not to show too much, not to move too fast. But Mara had her own scars, and she understood. We moved at our own strange pace, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always honest. One night, months later, she asked me about Julia. It was late, we were both a little drunk, and the city lights flickered beyond her window. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" she asked, not unkindly. I thought about it for a long time. "I don't know," I said finally. "Sometimes I think I already have. Sometimes I think I never will. Maybe it's not about her anymore." She squeezed my hand. "Maybe it's about you." I realized then that forgiveness wasn't a gift you gave to someone else. It was permission to move on, to stop letting the past decide the future. I wasn't sure I was there yet, but I wanted to be. Therapy helped too, though I had resisted it at first. I found someone who didn't let me wallow, who nudged me away from rehearsing the pain and towards something like acceptance. She gave me exercises, like the Gottman method I'd read about. Write down every fear, every wound, every shred of anger, then try to see what I could let go of, even just for a day. It was hard, but it worked, a little at a time. I learned to trust myself again before I could trust anyone else. I learned to notice the small good things, a text from Mara, a sunny morning, a joke at work that made me laugh. I learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it never happened, but choosing not to let the story own you. I still got the occasional email from Julia. She'd send photos of her daughter, updates about her new life. Sometimes I replied, sometimes I didn't. I wished her well and meant it. Her choices were hers. My life was mine. Mara and I moved in together a year after we met. It wasn't a fairy tale. Some days were hard, and I still flinched at unexpected triggers. But we built something honest, brick by brick. We learned each other's patterns, our wounds and joys, and made space for all of it. The last time Julia emailed, her daughter had started school. She said she was happy, that she'd found peace. She thanked me for everything, for loving her once, for letting her go, for not holding on to bitterness. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something like relief. Mara and I had dinner on the balcony that night, watching the city glow with the promise of summer. She reached for my hand, and I let her. The old fear was still there, but it was smaller, quieter, almost gentle. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to. It's just a story now." She nodded. We all have stories. I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. My story wasn't about betrayal or loss or what could have been. It was about survival and healing and the messy, beautiful work of starting over. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Please like, comment, or subscribe if this resonated with you. And remember, your story isn't over, not by a long shot. The city never really slept, but there were quiet hours, just before dawn, when the river mist curled around the street lamps and the world felt softer, unfinished. That's when I like to walk, shoes scuffing wet pavement, the air sharp enough to keep me honest. Sometimes I'd find myself watching the ferries glide along the water, their lights blinking in and out of fog, and wonder if Julia ever found this kind of peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but of acceptance. The cold didn't sting as much anymore. One morning in early October, the leaves were just starting to blush at the edges, and the bakery on the corner let their cinnamon rolls cool on the window ledge. The scent was impossible to resist. I ducked inside for coffee and there she was. Mara, hair pulled back, cheeks flushed with sleep or brisk air, holding 2 mugs. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, grinning. "Not really. You?" She shrugged, handing me a coffee. "Dreams, old ghosts." We sat at a little table by the window, watching the city wake. I told her about the email from Julia, about the photo of her daughter, smiling, front tooth missing, a riot of curls under a red scarf. "She looks happy," Mara said, tracing the rim of her mug. "Yeah, I think they both are." A beat of silence. "Does it bother you that she writes?" It was a fair question. For a long time, every message from Julia felt like a stone dropped into my stomach, ripples of memory spreading until I wasn't sure where the present ended and the past began. But now, it was different, softer, like hearing a story from another life. "Not anymore," I said. "It's background noise, like the river. Sometimes I notice it, but it doesn't pull me under." Mara smiled, and in that half second, I realized how far I'd come, how much of myself I'd reclaimed, piece by fractured piece. We finished our coffee, walked home as the sun spilled over the rooftops. The city came to life around us, delivery trucks rumbling, dogs tugging at leashes, laughter echoing from a rooftop garden. I felt present, not haunted. There was a time when I thought healing meant erasing the past, scrubbing every trace of pain from memory. But healing, I'd learned, was messier. It meant living with the scars, letting them remind me not of betrayal, but of survival. That autumn, Mara and I took weekend trips out of the city. Winding roads through gold-tipped forests, roadside diners with cracked linoleum and perfect pie. We kept our phones off, talked for miles. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just listened to the hum of tires and the wind chasing leaves across the hood. One night, in a rented cabin, rain drumming on the roof, Mara asked if I ever thought about having a family. The question settled between us, gentle but insistent. "I used to," I admitted, "before. Then it felt impossible, like trusting again would be some kind of weakness." She shifted closer, her hand finding mine. "It isn't weakness, it's hope." We sat in the hush, the future stretching out like the road ahead, unknown but not frightening. Back in the city, life went on. Work deadlines, new recipes, inside jokes that grew with each passing week. The scars didn't disappear, but they faded, edged out by new lines, laugh lines mostly. I caught myself humming in the kitchen, something I hadn't done in years. Then, one morning, Mara found a letter tucked under our door. No postmark, just my name in looping handwriting. My heart lurched. Julia. Inside, a single page. She'd met someone, she wrote, someone kind. She was scared, but wanted me to know she was trying again, not to replace, but to build. Her daughter asked about me sometimes, and she told her stories, not of betrayal, but of the good times, the laughter. She hoped I was well. I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer. The final piece, maybe. Not closure, nothing so neat, but a kind of grace. Later, I showed it to Mara. She read it in silence, then handed it back. "Are you okay?" "I think so, yeah." She pulled me close, rain tapping the windows, the city a blur beyond the glass. I let myself lean in, let the past drift further away. That winter, snow blanketed the city. Mara and I built a crooked snowman in the courtyard, neighbors watching from their windows, bemused. Someone brought out a thermos of mulled wine, and soon the courtyard filled with laughter, mittened hands passing mugs, faces rosy with cold and joy. I looked around, at Mara, at strangers turned friends, at the world remade by a single night's snow, and realized I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal, the next shock. I was living, really living. Sometimes when the city is quiet and the river mist blurs the lights, I think of Julia and her daughter. I hope they are well. I hope their laughter rings out on cold mornings, that they find warmth in unexpected places. As for me, I keep walking those early hours, shoes wet with dew, heart lighter with every step. The past is a place I visit, not a place I live. And in the present, hand in hand with hope, I build something new. A life not defined by what I've lost, but by what I'm willing to risk for love. If you've listened all this way, thank you for walking with me. If this story moved you, please like, comment, or subscribe. Your story matters too. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and hit like. It really helps the channel. And subscribe for more true stories.